The 14th year of Chenghua. Chapter 53. Work to the bone. Two enemies. One wanted you dead, the other wanted to use you. Which one would you choose? If Lady Ninth died, the one Deng Shuke would come to kill next was Tang Fan. He couldn't let that happen, so he had to find her people to help her out. She and Deng Shuke were in a conflict. She was fond of him, giving him a lot of leeways. The commotion from the fight had alarmed many people. Everyone watched the two leaders fight each other and sort of not sure what they should do. They successively ran to the cellar's entrance, immediately clogging it up. Tang Fan was not far away and caught sight of the bodyguard that had just been at Lady Ninth's side. "Big brother, go in and see for yourself, now. Ahan is fighting with the second in command. He's going to kill her." Lady Ninth had been wanting to both seduce Tang Fan and tell him some discreet secrets, so she had sent this bodyguard away. He called her Ahan to demonstrate that their relationship was no longer simple. Sure enough, the bodyguard's face twisted up. Where are they? There wasn't actually a need for Tang Fan to explain as much, as the man had long heard the sounds of weapons clashing coming from nearby. Without another word, he dashed forward. Tang Fan followed him as he coaxed him, "You have to rescue Ahan, big brother. Nothing can happen to her." The guard couldn't pay him any mind, of course, shoving the crowd to the side and rushing in. Tang Fan, who was not far away, heard Deng Shuke suddenly shouted, "What are you all staring for? Help me kill this woman. We can't let her get back to the overseer and complain." "How dare you?" Lady Ninth shouted. It was clear that she was gasping for breath as she spoke, an obvious sign that she was gradually coming to be at a disadvantage. This was truly an unshakable desire to silence someone by death. Face slightly twisting, Tang Fan could not care about anything else other than to find a way to escape. Under these circumstances, no one was paying any mind to where he was, either. Whilst the two sides sank into a brawl, Tang Fan had long since fled into a food cellar at the bend ahead. At the time many people had since run off to join the fray, so he came out of his hiding spot and ran forth, hoping to be able to find an exit. This place was in the complete opposite direction of the path to where Adong and the children were kept. Tang Fan firmly believed that with Deng Shuke's intelligence, he definitely wouldn't have set up just one entry point, because if he did so then his group would be practically turtles in a jar if someone blocked that single entry up. This underground maze wasn't that big since the cellars were so few. Its complication was mainly due to the passages between said cellars being twisting and winding that if one was not familiar with them, they would get confused. After turning and turning around infinite bends for a long while, evading paths that might have people guarding them all the while, Tang Fan finally found an area that looked like an exit. It was because it's on an upward slope and had a couple of guards keeping watch on it. Deng Shuke had currently summoned all of his subordinates in order to kill Lady Ninth, yet these two were still here. This signified that the spot they were watching had to be very important, and has to be an entryway. Alone inside a den of thieves, he accordingly had no way to bring the children outside by himself. He would definitely get straight up killed before he could leave, and then suffering would spread to the little ones. No matter how much he wanted to run to Adong and rescue them all straight away, his logic told him that he wouldn't be able to. The children were Deng Shuke's money makers. He wouldn't rashly abandon them, else he wouldn't have been willing to defy the court officials and risk worldwide anger for them. Tang Fan was different. He had no sort of use whatsoever to the man, and would become a nuisance for him while they run away. The best method was therefore to save himself first, wait for a chance to escape in the fray, then get the rescuing forces back here. Catching Deng Shuke's group all at once would also save the children. Still, he was vaguely pessimistically aware that said fray might come to its conclusion soon. Deng Shuke had more numbers and Lady Ninth was no match for him, owed to her being too arrogant and self-assured. She believed that her status as the overseer's envoy and the South Side gang's honored guest would make Deng Shuke too afraid to act against her, and she had hence contradicted him in all regards. Yet, due to being suppressed by her, the man had long planned to silence her. They just so happened to be in the wilderness, so as long as Lady Ninth's forces were eliminated, he could place the blame of her death to the authorities and none would be the wiser. Naturally, Tang Fan wasn't really concerned about her. She had spoken nicely and planned to return the children to him, but that had only been because she had wanted to oppose Deng Shuke, not because of any benevolence on her part. However, if she died before Suizhou's team could get here, he would be caught up in a very dangerous situation. The exit was visibly close at hand, yet he could not advance, only able to hide in a dark place with his hands tied. This situation of being on someone else's chopping block really made one anxious and helpless. Regardless of how clever he was, he momentarily couldn't think of a way out of this. Right at that second, the flurried sound of footsteps approached. Without time to think deeply, he quickly hid inside the shadows of a nearby recess. He saw a few people running towards the end of the tunnel where the two were guarding. "What's going on?" one of the guard asked. "Lady Ninth is dead," someone else answered. "The second in command ordered us to prepare to retreat." The man was very shocked. "She's dead? How? Were you enchanted by that woman's beauty for you to care so much, you clown?" the other chided cheerfully, then hushed his voice. "The boss killed her, along with her two subordinates. That lady was giving him a hard time about everything. He tolerated it for so long, it'd actually be weirder if he didn't kill her." The man who asked knew the connection between her and the White Lotus Society, however. "But isn't she the envoy of the overseer? Is killing her just like that will not bring retribution? Don't even talk about them. We pay them in coin every year, but all they do is benefit without doing anything for us. The second in command has long wanted to oppose them. In any case, the authorities have come to meddle, so when we put the blame of her death onto them, no one will suspect us at all." That one man actually had some brains, hesitating when he heard that. "Then, won't we be wanted by both the authorities and the overseer?" "Cut the crap," the other said impatiently. "The second in command said that people from the mountain fortress are here, so we have to hurry and pack, then get ready to escape before the authorities arrive. You guys will be responsible for bringing up the rear by guarding one of the exits, so that the enemy doesn't strike at us from behind. By the way, that man that cripple Luo tied up ran off. Have you seen him?" "No. We haven't dared to leave our spots for half a second, and haven't seen even a ghost. There was a short opening at another exit due to all the craziness. The second and third in command suspect that the guy ran off during that. Anyways, if you ever see him, just kill him and be done with it." Tang Fan wondered how a third in command was present here, too, but had a realization as soon as he thought back on it. When he had met Deng Shuke, there had been an elder sitting next to him. He was likely that. Following his murder of Lady Ninth and intent to evacuate, Tang Fan's treatment had gone from need to kill if seen, but he wasn't the slightest bit happy about that because once Deng Shuke got deep into the mountains, that would be tantamount to a dragon returning to the sea and finding his tracks would become difficult. The two men affirmed, immediately after which there came another burst of footsteps walking away. They began to speak in quiet voices. "If the boss is having us bring up the rear, when will it be time for us to join up? It can't be that we'll have to wait until everyone else is gone to leave, can it? We'll just wait. If we leave too early and the second in command sees, we'll get reprimanded. Are we going to search for that man he was talking about? You idiot. What search? Escaping with our lives is what's important. Once we're up in the mountain, the authorities won't be able to find us. Why are you still worried about secrets leaking out?" Tang Fan had no desire to continue listening to them, his worries multiplying. Fearing that the children would get brought away by Deng Shuke, he cautiously retraced his steps. Upon Lady Ninth's death, Deng Shuke had brought everyone into a retreat at another exit. But, No matter how quickly they moved, they were still bogged down by a group of children. Getting them out of the cellar wasted no small amount of time by itself. Dong had recalled Tang Fan's instructions. Knowing that the villains wouldn't kill them right away, she very slowly dilly-dallied, then purposefully collapsed onto the ground, howling that she couldn't walk. One man had no choice but to lift her up by the back of her collar and carry her. They left in bursts, Tang Fan following far behind them. Faintly, he heard them say that there was already a carriage to welcome them outside, which inevitably made him even more anxious. Watching as they exited the cave, he then took that opportunity to run out and hide behind a nearby boulder. If he could have left here a half shishan earlier instead, he could have rushed to fetch reinforcements. Now, all that was on his mind was that he couldn't simply let these group escape, or else it would be even harder to find the children later on. Thinking like so, he no longer cared about saving himself first. He shouted out a stop, then came out from behind the rock. That loud holler was basically a clap of thunder in the open countryside. All the gang members gave a huge jump in fright, and even Deng Shuke promptly turned around. Upon seeing Tang Fan, he was startled. After which he smiled sinisterly. "I thought you had run off. I was going to let you keep your little life, but you jumped out yet again. Lighting a lantern in a latrine really is asking for death, huh?" Tang Fan tidied out his sleeves, unbothered. "I did indeed escape ahead of time, and notified the Chenghua and Western Depot. They're 5 li away, but they'll be here soon." His statement caused a bit of uproar. Upon hearing that the authorities were coming, the gang members showed expressions of slight unease. Tang Fan didn't wait for Deng Shuke to console his people and promptly cutting him off at the head. "Truthfully speaking, second in command, I didn't want to force you into a dead end, but since you've killed Lady Ninth and broken it off with the White Lotus Society, you have no way of retreat. If you continue being hostile towards the authorities, you'll have no one on either side, and your situation will be bleak. Even if you flee into the mountains, the court will dispatch troops to flatten you all in an instant. Since that's so, why can't we just shake hands and talk of peace? So long as you hand those children over, I can speak on your behalf towards Chief Eunuch Wang and the Northern Administrative Court Division. Your brothers would all survive, too. Isn't that just perfect?" Deng Shuke sneered. "You speak so elegantly. Too bad you're not the emperor, else I would believe you. If I have a change of heart now, I would have no exploitable worth to that Wang guy. He's itching to make me be the scapegoat, so why would he spare us just because of your pleading? Rather than struggle beneath the hands of others, it's better to stand by yourself on the mountaintop. I would rather die upon a pile of gold and silver than be a slave to someone else." Tang Fan cupped his hands and said, "Second in command, I respect you as a frank man. Would this be possible to discuss? If you leave the children behind, you can go without hindrance. Once the Chenghua and the Western Depot arrive, I'll help out by stopping them so that they can't catch up to you. This way, both sides are conceding a step. How about that?" His expression was way too calm, for one man facing a dozen or so South Side gang members. With no fear on his face and an assuredness to his speech, they were subtly made to believe in his words automatically. The elder, who appeared to be the third in command, even said to Deng Shuke, "He's right. We've now had a falling out with the White Lotus Society, so it's best not to quarrel with the authorities too much, or else we'll suffer from enemies on both sides." Deng Shuke raised his hand to stop the other's speech from continuing. His eyes stared straight at Tang Fan. "Even I nearly believed you. You have no reinforcements coming at all, yet you're so bold as to bluff us here." With no change in expression, Tang Fan raised a brow. "How can you say that?" The man grinned maliciously. "When you were caught, I personally searched and got everything off of you. What could you have used to notify the authorities with? Your blabber just now was very convincing, you nearly duped me. Someone, kill him." Tang Fan had said all that bluffing drivel to stall for time, not expecting that his counterpart would call it so quickly. Watching two robust men of the gang advancing towards him with steel sabers and large strides, he had to sternly say, "Halt! The reinforcements are right behind you." Deng Shuke was unmoved. "Just do it already." He already regarded Tang Fan as a dead man, mounting his horse as he spoke. Another carriage with the children on it also began to gallop forwards. Before Tang Fan could react, those two sharp steel blades were already before him. He couldn't dodge. He had done all he could to stall them, but Suizhou's group had yet to appear. Even with a million kinds of tricks, he was no match for heavy artillery. With nothing that he could do and no way to run, he thought to himself that his life was over and simply closed his eyes, baring his neck to receive the blow. A few breaths later, the blades that ought to have been hacking down on his head were slow to arrive, and the anticipated pain did not come. Instead, the sound of sliced wind entered his ears. He involuntarily opened his eyes, then discovered that the situation in front of him had undergone a complete transformation. The men that were about to hack him to death had collapsed, one with a spring-gilt saber pierced through the center of his back, and the other with a feathered arrow stuck in his skull. There were several other arrows, as well, shot into either horses or people. The horses, suffering injury and fright, knocking people down to the ground with whinnies. Both shocked and furious, Deng Shuke yelled out a prompt decision to everyone, "Retreat." However, it was clearly a half step too late for that. Four figures rushed down from the forest ahead and threw themselves at them. Upon closer inspection, it was Suizhou with his four men. Said man's hands were empty. It wasn't difficult to see that it was he who had thrown the spring-gilt saber, thus taking care of one of Tang Fan's attackers. Tang Fan shouted, "Your saber's here," then drew it out of the man's back. Ignoring the blood that splashed onto him, then he tossed the blade back to Suizhou. Suizhou made a beautiful jump and caught it steadily in midair, then cut down another trafficker as he got down. Deng Shuke's subordinates weren't weak, especially not these trusted aides of his. Skills aside, there were only a few people that had returned with Suizhou. They would only make him lose a few underlings at best, but not enough to put them in such a panic. The ones that really caused the situation to turn around were the troops Wang Zhi had brought, since all those arrows had come from his western depot wardens. Seeing his brigade arrive, first shooting arrows and then joining the fight, Suizhou's group instantly felt like they had received the assistance of a god. Deng Shuke's men were completely crushed in number. The two sides fought into a mess, the victor and loser being only a matter of time. Still, Tang Fan was anxious. Seizing the opportunity while everyone was too busy to pay attention to him, he ran to the carriage with the children in it. He feared that if he was a bit too late, they would get taken as hostages by the desperate South Side gang. The curtain of said carriage lifted, as Adong, who was supposed to be bound, was currently crouched and observing the outside, several heads hidden behind her. The kids were tightly clutching at her clothes, looking utterly terrified. The reason they could move freely was because the porcelain piece Tang Fan had left to her had done its part. After little Adong had taken advantage of the chaos to untie herself, she set her other little friends free as well. This had undoubtedly saved a lot of time. Ecstatic, he ran to the carriage, got the children out of it one by one, then had Adong bring them to hide behind a nearby boulder, telling them that they weren't to come out unless all the bad guys had been taken care of. In the middle of his piece-by-piece instructions, Suizhou suddenly shouted, "Runking, move!" Tang Fan swiftly turned his head to see Deng Shuke bolting towards him, a blood-stained saber in hand with crazed and twisted look in his eyes, and dense murderous intent on his face. Evidently, the battle had revolved into a crushing defeat for him, and he was unreconciled to being helpless, wanting to take the children as hostages. The incident happened in no more than a short moment. He looked insane, but his mind was still very clear. He knew that holding Tang Fan as a hostage would be useless, as the other was a mere minor official. He was insignificant and can be discarded at any time, and of no use to him. If he wanted a hostage, it would be best to catch those two children of high-ranking officials, since they were the actual targets of the authorities' relentless pursuit. Only by clutching them in his hands would he be truly safe. How could Tang Fan not know what he was thinking? Once Zhu Yang's daughter was caught, no one would be able to stop Deng Shuke. Thus, without thinking, he didn't dodge to the side, but instead pounced right at the man. This act looked quite a bit stupid to the irrelevant onlooker, because Tang Fan didn't have the slightest bit of martial arts capability. He is an ordinary person through and through. He held no weapons, nor did he have the strength to contend with Deng Shuke at all, making his pounce the equivalent of hitting a rock with an egg. Yet, that was what he did. Within split-second decisions, there were no affected pretenses, just subconscious actions. In Tang Fan's point of view, he didn't think himself to be a court official that was above these children. Instead, it was precisely because he was an imperial official that he needed to take charge in protecting the citizens. Idiot. Giant idiot. Colossal idiot. Wang Zhi was also witnessing this scene. He was so far away. It was simply impossible for him to block the blade hacking at Tang Fan. All he could do was watch on helplessly as he swore loudly. Even Suizhou, who was a little closer, would have been too late, but he still wanted to do all he could. Rather than wear his mouth out swearing like eunuch Wang did, he sped up, swift as lightning, and turned into a black blur saber in hand. He thrust it at Deng Shuke. No one had expected that right when Deng Shuke was on the verge of slashing Tang Fan, the latter would suddenly take some unknown items out of his lapels, then pelt them down upon him. They were several dark objects that looked like stealth weapons at a glance, very sharp, with something apparently daubed onto it. Could they have been applied with poison? Greatly shocked, Deng Shuke quickly waved his saber in an attempt to protect his body. All that was heard was a series of clinks as the objects were all struck away, some breaking into several pieces to scatter successively onto the ground. With one look, Deng Shuke became royally pissed. What stealth weapons? Those were clearly broken fragments of porcelain. The areas that looked poisoned were just the blue-white decoration of the bowl. The only thing he had on his mind in that instant was to chop Tang Fan into bits. As was said, the battlefield would forever undergo infinite changes in the span of a second. The brief amount of time Tang Fan had bought was enough. Suizhou had arrived, his spring-gilt saber pressing down with the weight of a thunderclap, the billowing light of its murderous aura rushing for Deng Shuke. He had no choice but to turn around, grit his teeth, and contend with Suizhou. Opportunities were fleeting, and Tang Fan had distracted him so much, he had missed his for taking hostages. Not even a moment later, the Jinyue, and even the depot wardens, immediately followed suit. Everyone knew that Deng Shuke was the leader of these operations. Given that he was caught, that would be a great contribution. The others having already been consecutively restrained, vacant hands thronged up to surround Deng Shuke. The man's defeat was an inevitability, just a matter of when. Having escaped with his life from beneath a blade and gathered back his own fate, Tang Fan finally let out a sigh of relief. After the rush of excitement subsided, his body went limp and he sat right onto the ground. "Gag, are you all right?" Dong ran over to help him, with noisy steps. "I am," he answered exhaustedly. "You're bleeding." She pointed at his neck. He felt at it and there were indeed some thin, bleeding cuts. He had likely gotten inadvertently nicked when Deng Shuke had sent the porcelain pieces flying. Dong took out a handkerchief from her arms and handed it to him. It was a prize he had won from guessing lantern riddles. Dong had a pile of things crammed into her arms, of which there were 3 handkerchiefs. Not using one right now would be in vain. He accepted it, then casually covered his neck, patting her on the head. "Go look after those little brothers and sisters. Don't let them run all around." She agreed, then turned and left. Right then, a mocking laugh came from behind him. Look at your sorry state. He didn't need to turn around to know who was it that came. Why are you not lending a hand, eunuch Wang, and was instead getting nice and cool there? The overall situation is settled. Just reporting this case as closed would grant me merits. Why should I take to the field myself? You were searching down those official roads. How were you able to arrive in time? After you all went on the off-road, I went to get horses, then divided us up into two groups. The others followed along the roads while I came to look for you all, but the time wasted between going back and forth and getting the horses was a lot, which is why we could only get here now. These Chenghua are really useless. If the Western Depot had taken this route, you would have never gotten trapped in that den of thieves, because we would have long beaten these roof-jumping clowns into the gutter. Tang Fan sighed, but with an expression of immense relief. And who's to blame for that? I told you to take this road, but you didn't believe me, wasting a lot of time for no good reason. We caught a gang member, but didn't expect that even with a stab wound and 2 broken fingers, he would still dare to lie to us. Sui Zhou only has 4 people with him, and they were afraid of not having enough manpower, so they had to go all together to give pursuit up the mountain. You all being able to arrive in time is the exhaustion of these villains' fate, else my own life probably would have gotten lost here. Also, the reason Deng Shuke and them left the cellars was because the South Side gang has a stronghold up on the mountain ahead, which they could leave for in order to hide out until this all blew over. After these people are brought back, its exact position needs to be gotten out of them, as the stronghold would be best uprooted. The gang's power is certainly not limited to just Deng Shuke's few people, either. There's presumably other members all over the capital. Please do eradicate their evil, eunuch Wang, and wipe them out one by one. Wang Ji frowned, clearly unwilling to go through so much trouble. In his view, once the children were found, their assignment was done. Right as Tang Fan turned his head, he noticed the change in his expression. He knew what he was thinking. The South Side gang has some connection to the White Lotus's demonic followers, he supplied. Wang Ji's expression grew stern. Is that true? I heard it myself while I was in there. South Side gang is only one such gang affiliated with the White Lotus Society, and is also a source of income for it. However, Deng Shuke refused to be bossed around, so he had gotten into an internal fight with the overseer's envoy, then killed her. After you bring him back, search him well. You're certain to find that society's command token on him. The sorcerer, Li Zilong, had once caused widespread panic inside the imperial palace, and subsequent investigation had proved that he had been associated with the White Lotus Society. Ever since then, its name had been formally placed out in the open, causing everyone to have no choice but to confront it head-on. Unfortunately, these past 2 years, the Chenghua and the 2 depots had investigated it on the sly, yet made no progress. The organization was concealed so deeply, even they couldn't get out any clues, only able to catch its small fry. Now that the connection between the gang and White Lotus Society had surfaced, there was no need for Tang Fan to say more. Alongside Boss Lai, Luz Hilly, and those other underworld forces, Wang Ji's group would certainly go make an inquiry. While the two spoke, Deng Shuke was heavily outnumbered in spite of his extraordinary martial arts and was captured at last. Leaving out those that had been shot dead by arrows or killed in the fight, there were a total of 7 gang members left alive, including their second and third in commands. Of greater importance was that the group of children had suffered no major issues, other than a scare. The lot of them had gone hard all night. Despite a sum of merits being arranged before them, there was no celebration. Each of them had a face full of exhaustion and a longing for death. This was true even for those of martial arts, to say nothing of an ordinary man like Tang Fan. He had gone through several life and death scenarios, really working himself to the bone. The carriage Deng Shuke had intended to transport the children with was once again packed with them, but its destination had changed. Master Tang was injured all over and was shockingly tired. He didn't feel like riding by himself. In order to avoid dozing and falling off partway through the journey, he shared a horse with Suizhou. Everyone was weary. The horses weren't going very fast, jolting with the addition of the uneven path. Sitting behind Suizhou, Tang Fan unwittingly fell asleep amidst this rhythm, his drool flowing onto his back. Sui Qianhu said nothing and only gazed up at the sky. End chapter. The 14th year of Chenghua. Chapter 54. Someone else's business. Following the case of the abduction of children, the South Side Gang was inevitably pulled out by its roots. With the Western Depot and Northern Administrative Court Division jointly pursuing them, not even a common follower of the group slipped past, let alone core members like Deng Shukai and the third in command. All were arrested, taken away and interrogated. The South Side Gang had completely fallen apart. This disturbance sent chickens flying and dogs jumping. All the gangs of the capital had reshuffled their power decks, where gang leaders like Boss Lai and Luz Hilly were also invited for questioning. Everyone momentarily had to tuck their tails between their legs and behave, trembling in fear of having the misfortune to be linked to the South Side Gang. Once this sweep was made, the capital immediately looked much cleaner. According to the intelligence gathered by Lao Wang's group at the Shuntian prefecture, even the petty thieves that normally took advantage of crises had calmed down by a lot. Those that had just come to Beijing from elsewhere now believed that the capital's security was consistently this good, sighing about how being right under the sun of heaven's feet really is special and something like that. Meanwhile, Tang Fan and the rest had received quite some information about the White Lotus Society, straight out of Deng Shukai's mouth. The White Lotus Society's history could be traced back to the Northern Song from the end of Yuan Dynasty and the start of the Ming Dynasty, when the world was in chaos and a generation of heroes was cropping up, also happened to be the era when the White Lotus Society was flourishing and expanding. Its nominal leader at the time had been Chen Yueliang, a Han king that had contended with the great ancestor for supremacy over the realm. Later on, Chen Yueliang had died and his powers were taken over by the great ancestor who had intended to govern the whole realm. Disgusted by such rebellious organization who had refused the great ancestor's ruling, he did not only refuse their surrender but ruthlessly wiped them out by force. From then on, the White Lotus Society went underground, their war banners laid down. Of course, they had not truly vanished in their entirety. During Hongguo's era, they had been too afraid to come out and cause chaos due to his strength. By the time of Jingnan War, when Yang Il had been competing for the throne with his nephew, the White Lotus Society had emerged to support Jianwen. In their view, the young and weak Jianwen would have been easier to control than his shrewd and powerful war veteran uncle. However, they had surprisingly pawned the wrong treasure once more. The nephew was defeated, the uncle had become the emperor, and the White Lotus Society was forced to sink below the surface of the water yet again. Hidden in shadows, it did not rest but instead continued to silently extend its influence while waiting for the right opportunity to come. Following that, the emperors of Ren and Xian had caused the country to move into a period of stable growth, where politics were still clean and the citizens' lives were getting better. There had been no leeway for the White Lotus Society to be able to act, so they seemed to disappear completely from people's sights, gone without a trace. Those a little younger had probably never even heard of its name. During Yingzong's time, the emperor himself had been a disappointment. He agreed on a personal campaign at the instigation of a eunuch beside him, resulting into his captured by the Warais after running off somewhere. Later on, when the truth come to light, the instigator Wang Zhen seemed to have been inextricably connected to the demonic society. After him, said party had colluded with the Warais, attempting to take advantage of the leaderless crowd of the great Ming dragons to attack Beijing in one go, thus swallowing up half the country. After that, many twists in the ways of the world had come to be and the White Lotus Society has suffered many setbacks. When the situation became stable and there was no more opportunity for the group to take advantage of, the White Lotus Society would appear to have vanished from the human world without a trace. But the second there came to be a slight disturbance, they would show up out of nowhere again, stirring up a storm. The imperial court was very vexed by this, but the various factions in the court competed with each other, never tiring of infighting for years on end, while the emperor himself had no mind for political affairs, assigning matters to swindling slackers in the court that would waste their lives away. No one could find the energy to deal with this enormous, tightly undercover demonic society. That was until the Li Zilong incident. The emperor had been shocked and furious. Only then did the Chenghua and the depots cooperated with each other and stepped up their efforts to pursue and track down the White Lotus Society followers from all locations. However, the enemy was in the know, while they were in the dark. Despite their exacting means, the whole country was too big that it was difficult to find those demons who were hiding amongst the common people. Just like this time, for example. If Tang Fan had not heard Lady Ninth's confession with his own ears, he would have never thought that Wan Tong had been bribed, nor that the South Side Gang, who was an underground group in the imperial capital, was actually related with the White Lotus Society. From the beginning, the South Side Gang was being supported by the White Lotus Society. Their shady dealings were not any different than those of other underworld groups, but with more than half of their profits needing to be transferred to the overseer. Deng Shuke had been an ambitious man, though. As time passed by, he felt dissatisfied, wondering to himself, why am I doing all the hard work, yet you lot get all the benefits? He had purposefully tried to climb up onto a connection to Wan Tong, get support from court officials and draw a boundary line with the White Lotus Society. He wasn't going to completely cut ties with the White Lotus Society though. He intended to hand over the amount that has to be handed, but he would merely claim that business hadn't been doing well, gradually lessening the turned over amount over the years. Meanwhile, he would bribe himself a connection with Wan Tong by dividing half of the profits from Xiao Yang with him. Everything would have gone his way, wasn't that delightful? Yet, since the overseer had been receiving less money, they had sent someone to investigate, and that was Lady Ninth. Unexpectedly at the same time, Deng Shuke's underlings had become too presumptuous by abducting 2 children that they should not have, resulting into a very large trouble that even Wan Tong couldn't keep him safe. He thereafter had no option but to escape to the deserted village and wait for the wind to blow over. Then, due to the conflict that Lady Ninth and Deng Shuke had been having for a while, she had exploited Tang Fan's coincidental arrival to fight with him, only to end up paying for it with her own life. That was the sum of the matter, but Tang Fan and the rest wanted to know more than just that. They wanted to know the situation of the White Lotus Society even more so, including where that alleged overseer was, how many followers existed, where they were, what schemes they had been planning recently, and so on. Unfortunately, Deng Shuke knew nothing about all that inside information. He was the head of the entire South Side Gang, but the fact was, he had only been a peripheral member of the White Lotus Society and was not qualified to participate in its major affairs. Due to the torture employed by the Western Depot, the iron-boned Deng Shuke was forced to confess all that he knew. He claimed that he only knew that the White Lotus Society had a leader who was a complete enigma. Even people like Lady Ninth had never seen his face before, let alone Deng Shuke. Aside from the main sanctum, branch sanctums had been established all over the country in order to spread the White Lotus Society's influence throughout. Since Beijing was the imperial capital that had agencies such as the Chenghua and the depots, the White Lotus Society didn't dare to be out in the open in it. Hence no separate branch sanctum was set up in the capital, and it only fostered peripheral groups like the South Side Gang. The South Side Gang periodically have to send a portion of their earnings for the overseer, but there was no fixed time when it was sent. The overseer would always send someone over to take the amount, and Deng Shuke's group would be responsible for receiving them. Said envoy was also not fixed. The previous envoy before Lady Ninth had been a man called Meng Xi. The envoy would have their token of command and spoken code as a means of contact. The token represented the overseers, which Deng Shuke had snatched from Lady Ninth before. The token with the highest gold content can be used to command White Lotus Society members, but it can only be used with the corresponding secret code. The secret code would ensure that the token holder was indeed sent by the overseer. The secret code was very mysterious, too. The White Lotus Society had a set of corresponding secret codes which Deng Shuke had enumerated in full, but he also stated that in order to prevent traitors from cropping up, this set of secret code would be replaced on a regular basis. Each time the overseer's envoy would come over, they would give him the new secret codes that has to be used for the next time, nullifying the current set of secret codes. Everything was so meticulously kept confidential, and that was why the White Lotus Society could evade the investigation and suppression of the authorities, getting passed down through generations after generations. Deng Shuke could only give them this much information. Someone like Lady Ninth would probably knew more information, but she had already been killed along with her two subordinates. Wang Zhi and the rest had not eradicated the whole White Lotus Society, but the fact that they finally extracted the nail that it had hammered in the imperial capital was still a great achievement. However, Tang Fang felt that since the South Side gang had been able to sell young children to be palace eunuchs, then their connections to the imperial palace was not limited to bribing Wan Tong. He suggested that Wang Zhi conduct a deep investigation on it, but of course, his proposal was rejected. The grounds for Wang Zhi's rejection were quite simple. He had only made the time to come back to the capital because of the assignment that was given by His Majesty. Not that it was done, he had to rush back to Datong and he has no more time to spare. Moreover, he informed Tang Fan that the palace had long been wholly combed through following the Li Zilong incident. People with even tiny scars on their bodies, let alone the mark of the White Lotus Society, had been singled out and sent to the depots for their turns at interrogation. All spies affiliated with the White Lotus Society had then been arrested, while others that had been fined were also getting inspected at regular intervals, since there was no White Lotus Society mark left behind anywhere on their bodies. It meant that they had learned long ago that while the White Lotus Society mark was a real thing, it was only for middle and lower layer followers. Main sanctum envoys like Lady Ninth wouldn't have one at all. She was probably just scaring him while trying to probe his real intention at that time, as it was not really a requirement when recruiting followers. At the end of it, he also gravely warned Tang Fan, "Don't go finding something when there's nothing." His last statement has a profound meaning. With Tang Fan's intelligence, it wasn't hard for him to hear its connotation. Wang Zhi's reluctance to cause much trouble was actually pretty easy to understand. Although he wielded tremendous power, most of his authority was concentrated outside the palace and could not reach inside it. It wasn't just him, either. It was the same for Shang Ming of the Eastern Depot. When it came to authority within the inner palace, there were only two that could be spoken of: Huayan and Liang Fang. Within the 12 supervisories, the supervisory of ceremony management and the supervisory of royal steeds had the highest authority. Each division also had a wielder of the seal and a brush holder, which, in layman's terms, were the big boss and the second boss. Seniority had to be observed everywhere. Huayan and Liang Fang were both the big bosses of their respective supervisories, whilst even the two upstarts, Wang Zhi and Shang Ming, could only claim the titles of second bosses. Said big bosses were relied heavily upon by the emperor in no small measure, especially Liang Fang. Since he had taken the side of consort Wan, he was all the more like a fish put into water and have immense influence inside the palace. Wang Zhi didn't dare to provoke him rashly. Even though the South Side gang's connection to the inner palace might not be directly related to Liang Fang, it certainly couldn't be kept from his eyes and ears. Perhaps he was even benefiting from them. In any ways, deeper investigation of all this would inevitably drag him into it. Wang Zhi and Liang Fang were of the same type, looking down on all from above, with the latter being his senior. The former didn't want to offend him. Furthermore, this had already implicated Wan Tong, though the emperor hadn't done anything to him on behalf of consort Wan's face. After learning that Wan Tong had received bribes from the South Side gang, he requested that Yuan Ben be the active head of the Jinyue, which deprived Wan Tong of his authority and served to give him a small warning. Wan Tong sulked nearly to death about it. Naturally, he couldn't do anything with the emperor, but there was nothing stopping him from venting on Wang Zhi. Despite the eunuch being one of consort Wan's people, he was her little brother. If a servant could be close to her, how close would a brother be? Thus, Wang Zhi was summoned by consort Wan for a thorough scolding, and he too became depressed. The emperor had praised him, but then he had to turn his head and eat crap before the consort. He certainly didn't want to offend Liang Fang on top of that. After giving Tang Fan a warning, he headed straight for Datong the following day, setting his heart upon establishing military merits while putting everything else out of sight, out of mind. Without the support of the Western Depot, Tang Fan couldn't go investigate the palace by himself. Thankfully, Dong and the rest of the children were perfectly fine, and all the culprits had been arrested, Deng Shuke, the third in command, and the puppet gang leader Ding Yumu in particular. All of them were sentenced to execution, while the rest of the gang members were sentenced to army exile. In the Great Ming Code, human trafficking was called human thievery. Selling lawful civilians was a grade worse of a crime than selling servants, and those that lured, took, then sold civilians as slaves were to receive 100 hits with the paddle, then be banished 3,000 li away. However, Deng Shuke's group had colluded with the White Lotus Society, so their crime could not be categorized as regular abduction. The successive dynasties had the heaviest punishment related to rebellion. Originally, Deng Shuke had been sentenced to be cut in half across the waist, but he was getting special leniency and kindness for being forthcoming with all the information he knew, so he would first be killed with poison and would be beheaded afterwards. After all, getting cut was comparably painful. In this way, he would die a bit more comfortably. Prior to Dong's group, it was unknown how many children had fallen into their hands. Even Ding Yumu, who was actually just a puppet gang leader who hadn't done much himself, had an unfathomable amount of innocent blood staining his hands. The deaths of these three were not an injustice in the least. The work everyone had done for over half a night had not been in vain. The whole event came to an end at last, with a conclusion that barely counted as satisfactory. Apart from those wounded in the fight with the gang, Tang Fan was the one that had suffered the most injuries. First, he had been knocked out by a club to the head, which was later confirmed to have bled. Then, while he was kept in the cellars, his hands had bled from the binds. Then, he had gotten shoved by Shinshitu, where his knees immediately bruised and bled because he couldn't move well with his bound hands. Later still, his neck had gotten sliced by the deflected porcelain, and so on. Despite his injuries generally not being grave, his body was still riddled with wounds. Since all of them were incurred while doing official work, Master Tang was fortunately able to take half-month of recovery leave in good conscience and celebrate Suizhou's promotion. Yes, Suizhou was promoted yet again. This time was an accident, though. After he had handled Huang Jinglong's case, he had already been promoted to Deputy Chenghua. Reasonably, there shouldn't have been another promotion within such a brief time span, but the emperor had been unhappy with Wan Tong's collusion with human traffickers in the missing children's case and replaced him with Yuan Bin as the commanding officer of the Jinyue. Who was Yuan Bin? He had the merit of having rescued the late emperor. Back during the Tuma crisis, Yuan Bin had followed by Yingzong's side to protect him and looked after him during his captivity. This subject and his monarch had experienced such difficulties together, and thus, the relationship between them was incomparable to a typical subject. Later on, Yuan Bin had aided him in taking his throne back, which earned him another imperial merit. Due to this past history, the current emperor held extreme respect for Yuan Bin following his ascension. Since Yuan Bin was getting on in age, His Majesty didn't want to give him a position that would require him to actually work, and thus, just given him the title of commanding officer of the Jinyue. It was only because the emperor wanted to teach Wan Tong a lesson that he had asked Yuan Bin to step up. Yuan Bin, whose qualifications and prestige made even His Majesty be somewhat respectful to him. How could a lowly consort kin like Wan Tong's could be compared to him? Over the years, The atmosphere at the Jinyue had been stirred afoul because of Wan Tong, who had allowed vile people to rampage. Those who had ingratiated themselves to Wan Tong would become guests of the Wan family, and those who opposed him would be struck down using the powers of the Jinyue, just like that censor whom Suizhou had spoken of before. As soon as Yuan Ben came, the atmosphere had suddenly changed. The man was old yet remained strong and healthy for his age. As soon as he had arrived, he took down the two heads of the Northern Administrative Court Division, who were also known as Wan Tong's trusted lackeys. The latter had clenched his teeth in hatred, but was powerless against him. He also couldn't go complain to His Majesty, because His Majesty was the one who had sent Yuan Ben to reorganize the Jinyue in the first place. As that was so, no one dared to say anything whenever they caught sight of Wan Tong. Any sort of nasty character inevitably had to make way for him, tucking their tails between their legs so that they wouldn't get caught in the crossfire. Even though none of this had been directly related to Suizhou, the word of deputy had quickly been removed from his title on the grounds of his remarkable capability, and he became a genuine Chenghua. Chenghua were of true fifth rank. Their achievements and military official status were irrelevant, as the authority they wielded was not minor. Both the Northern and the Southern Administrative Court Division were divided into 5 centers, each with their own departments, which was headed by a Chenghua. More importantly, because Yuan Ben had just removed the heads of the Northern Administrative Court Division, no one was sitting in said position. He thus had Suizhou temporarily act as commander of the Northern Administrative Court Division. Upon consideration that this was a massive promotion, and out of fear that he might face dissent ions, he didn't promote him right away but made it appear as if it was a temporary position. A veteran's thinking was really out of the ordinary. This action of his was getting a lot of attention, and Suizhou had been particularly selected therein. If he performed well, then the position was his for real. If he didn't, then he could be kicked out at any time. Many coveted this position, and thus, it could be considered as an indirect encouragement for Suizhou to work hard. Now that he was having the salary of a Chenghua, the speed of his promotion was really inciting red-eyed jealousy in fourth-rank officials. However, he was also facing unprecedented pressure. How could he win over the rest of the Jinyue and fold them under his leadership? How could he make those below him obey whenever he sent them on assignments? Each and everything was a difficult problem. Regardless, this promotion was something worthy of celebration. In order to do so for him, Tang Fan, Xueling and a group of Suizhou's old subordinates arranged a feast outside, not at Xianyuan restaurant though, because that would be too expensive. Everyone was already familiar with each other, and the capital had a lot of places with good food, so there was no need to choose that place. Tang Fan picked out a reputable restaurant called Yangji's Lamb, which was most famed for its mutton. He booked a private room ahead of time, then called for some of his own colleagues from the Shuntian prefecture as well as the group of Jinyue. They all sat around the table for lamb hot pot. 4 pots were on the table, as well as 4 large plates of fatty, tender mutton beside them. There were vegetables such as cabbage and mushroom, as well as noodle dish and all sorts of other complementary ingredients and dishes. It was arranged in such a way that one could get what they want and cooked it in a way they like. It wasn't just Suizhou, but even Xueling and the rest of his group that had moved up a step thanks to Yuan Ben's blessing. They were all ecstatic. Meanwhile, Tang Fan had handled 2 major cases one after another, and thus establishing 2 major contributions. First, he had cleared away the suspicions from Consort Wan. Then, he had found the missing children of the 2 officials, infiltrated a den of thieves, and had a battle of wits and bravery with the Southside gang, which could be described as a life-risking task where he had held back none of his strength. Yet, his superiors had given him no reward whatsoever, nor had awarded him with promotion. He himself didn't feel this to be a big deal, but his close friends were inevitably upset on his behalf. Once they got drunk with wine and filled with food, Xueling stood up from his seat, walked over, then pat Tang Fan's shoulder hard to comfort him. "Runking, as I see it, you're not someone destined for bad luck. You'll definitely get promoted to high position. Don't get discouraged. Right. Peng Qi chimed in. Your good fortune just hasn't arrived yet. Don't be disheartened. The two of them still worked for Suizhou, but they had since been promoted to Beihu positions, their political careers going steady. It wasn't just them, but everyone that had been working under Suizhou had pretty much all been promoted. That was how they all knew that there would be meat to eat if they stuck with their superior, thus becoming all the more loyal to him. Seeing that Xueling had drunk too much, his entire body swaying as he half leaned on Tang Fan, Suizhou couldn't help but reach out and pull him away some. Stand properly, he scolded. They were not at work and literally everyone had been drinking, so Xueling wasn't much afraid of him. You're really good to brother Runking, big brother. Even we, your underlings that follow you everywhere, can't compare. Everyone agreed with the chorus of true, true. I still have empty rooms, Suizhou replied. How about you move in so that I can treat you well every day, too? Xueling immediately chuckled, saying nothing else. What a joke. Even though he hadn't taken a wife yet, he had a concubine at home, and frequently hung out around brothels. Making him meet with the frigid face of his superior every day would probably hurt him more than killing him would. Tang Fan grinned. Everyone else wants promotions, but I'm happy to remain as it is. Those sound like empty words. Who wouldn't be happy with a promotion? Xueling bellowed. True, everyone uproared. Tang Fan feigned bitter hardship. Just think about it, everyone. I'm only at 6th rank right now, but I've gone deep into a den of thieves, gotten knocked out and almost died. If I get promoted up a level, would I not have to go fight to the death with the leader of the White Lotus Society? This time next year, I might not even be able to sit down and have a drink with you all. With that amusing conjecture, everyone burst into roaring laughter. Those that had wanted to console him at the onset shut their mouths upon seeing how overwhelmingly positive he was. After the hosts and their guests had the utmost of merriment at the feast, they each returned to their respective homes, and each sought out their respective mothers or did whatever it was they should have been doing. On the way home, Suizhou noticed that there was gloom amidst Tang Fan's eyes. Thinking to himself he must had been feigning nonchalance in front of others but was actually upset deep inside, and thus said to him, fortune and misfortune goes hand in hand, and all the good and bad of the world is interdependent. Not getting promoted this time around might not be a bad thing. Maybe there's something better waiting for you up ahead. That's not what I'm worried about. What is it, then? It's not even the middle of the month yet, but I'm about to run out of salary, Master Tang answered with embarrassment. That was it? Suizhou was a little speechless, his cold face drawing down. Where did all your money go? It seemed like you only paid a few hundred won when you all treated me out tonight, right? Master Pan sought me out yesterday. We both ate somewhere, but when it came near time to pay the tab, that senior of mine got a stomachache and went to the latrine. I had to pay it first. He wanted to pay after he came back, but how could I accept his money then? Couldn't you two not go to Xianqi restaurant when going out to eat? Actually, it wasn't there. It was at that dumpling stall not far from Shuntian Prefecture Bureau. Whether it's the fish or cabbage pork dumplings you're eating, their food isn't any lesser than the wonton stall in the city's north. It's cold now, but when spring starts, they have Jimao mincemeat, and it's delicious. You're getting off track. Oh. Well, after the meal, it was about 100 strings. But, his face was full of sufferings. The day before yesterday, I had paid a visit to someone of my same year, then discovered that he was so poor, he was about to run out of food. So, I treated him to a meal, which was another 50 strings spent. One time doesn't feel like much, but why does it now feel like I spent so much all at once? The more Suizhou listened, the more he felt that something was amiss. Didn't you get 500 taels from that White Lotus Society woman? Even if you did give half to me, would the remaining 250 silver really be used up that quickly? Tang Fan had been pleased about the money for some time and did not tell anyone but Sui Zhou alone. He split it in half with him under the guise of dividing up spoils. Sui Zhou had refused it, but the other had insistently stuffed it into his hands to force him to accept it. With him saying that, Master Tang got even more embarrassed. There was another same year palace honorates of mine, his family was destitute. His home still had 4 children crying to be fed, but the lease on the house he was renting was about to be due, and he couldn't raise up the money. So I gave him those tails. Sui Zhou had no expression. You're a very generous one. Tang Fan believed that he was praising him, thickened up his face to feign modesty. How so? To aid those in need is the duty of those in my generations. I did not exert any effort to get that money anyway, so spending it was no harm. Sui Zhou remained expressionless as he retorted, what do you mean you didn't exert any effort? Did you steal it? Rob it? Did you forget that you almost lost your life in that gang's hideout? No matter what difficulties his family was having, giving him 100 taels would have been plenty. How can you be so shrewd when working yet can't apply that when it comes to yourself? You do things with no foresight, spending money like it's water. Master Tang was scolded into looking like a child that didn't dare to raise his head. Yes, yes, yes. When I go back, I'll have Dong help with supervising me, he said, ashamed. It really went without saying, but ever since Sui Zhou had risen up to be Commander Sui Chenghua and had taken charge of the Northern Administrative Court Division, His Majesty had flourished more by the day. His posture when admonishing had been plenty to start with, but now his face was so strict that pretty much no one would dare to make a peep to him at all. How would Dong be able to hold you back? He asked. From now on, after you get your salary, you will hand half of it over to me. I'll safeguard it for you. If you ever need to spend more after using up what you have on hand, you'll need to justify that to me first. You can use it only after I agree to it. Sui Zhou had never been fond of meddling in others' business. Almost all of others' business that he had cared about in this lifetime had come from Tang Fan's way. It was fortunate that they had the kind of relationship they had. If someone else had been ordered to do this, they would feel it difficult to understand and might even turn hostile. Someone like Master Tang, who was different from the average person, just nodded with delight. That's great. With you stopping me, I won't spend so recklessly. From that point on, Commander Sui Chenghua not only had a heap of things to look after in the Northern Administration Court Division, but also had to help Master Tang manage his resources when he returned home. He truly did wield total power, both externally and domestically, how very envy-inducing. Yet, right when everyone was thinking that Tang Fan would continue being a Shuntian prefect, news from the Ministry of Appointments came in, stating that he was to head over to that bureau. End chapter.